lovely people, it's your girl here, Queen Choma. How you guys doing? How is everyone doing? Hope you guys are doing great. Welcome and welcome back to my channel. So today's video is a part 2 video of the previous video that I made about a lady who came on to share her story of how she fell in love with her psychiatrist and he let him. So the lady went on to share her story of how she told her psychiatrist that she had a crush on him and he did not say anything. Instead, he kept him. So let's get right into it.
Welcome back to another installment of I Was in Love with My Psychiatrist and He Kept Me Anyway, Part 8. You all did some nasty work last night, and I had to turn off comments. People started posting my psychiatrist's first and last name, his picture in the comments. That was a jump scare. So, yeah, a few bad actors who wanted to be super sleuths got the privilege of commenting, mostly hate, let's be real, taken away for everyone. So at this point in the story, there are two main players. My psychiatrist, who's my age, who crossed major ethical boundaries, and my therapist, who is a 75-year-old woman with a PhD. Neither of these people, at this point in the story, I knew were crossing boundaries. I thought that everything was hunky-dory and that I was just in love with my psychiatrist and it was totally normal. Little did I know he was manufacturing everything so I could fall in love with him, because it was on him to set the professional boundary and not let attention build. So days after my psychiatrist's Christmas morning appointment, from a few videos back, where he got a crush confession from me and then 30 minutes of non-stop intimate content that he did not stop me, my boyfriend and I broke up days later. So then I started dating this other guy, and this other guy, this new guy, was a therapist. And I was like, oh great, someone who will be able to emotionally meet my needs. Yeah, I'm not going to date another therapist again. So this therapist and I, we went for coffee. It was nice. Our second date was a hike. And on this hike, this therapist starts telling me about how he has a crush on one of his clients. And I thought to myself, okay, this is strange, but go ahead. Like, we're on a date, dude. Why are you telling me about a crush on one of your clients? But go off, King. So then he was saying, yeah, she's so attractive and I think she likes me too. I go and visit her at work and her coworkers say, oh, so-and-so talks about you all the time. And I was like, okay, where does she work? And he said, well, I shouldn't tell you that because I really shouldn't be visiting her anyway. I was like, okay, no problem. So then he continues and he said, yeah, she wears these red lacy panties and short skirts. And I know she wears them for me. And like alarm bells were going off in my head. Mind you, I had no idea that my psychiatrist had similar feelings towards me at this point. But I just thought, wow, this man is borderline predatory. And he said, yeah, and you know, she just is so attractive that I have to smash mermate before every session because I just have to get that energy out of me. And I was like, okay. And yeah, he just felt compelled to tell me, and I did not understand why. Now I do. So he told me about how he's a predator, right? Another predator in the mental health industry. Shocker. So then at my next appointment with my psychiatrist, keep in mind, it had been 6 weeks of nonstop fun for this man. He got to use my crush confession and 30 minutes of content, for whatever he wanted to use it for, right? And if my psychiatrist was good at anything, it was being professional and acting professional and technically not crossing any lines. And he thought that he was so good at it, because he was good at it. But that doesn't mean he wasn't doing it. And so I told him, I said, yeah, Bo and I broke up. He had known about this other guy, my psychiatrist. I had mentioned him. And I told him that this new guy and I went on a date and we went on a hike. And I literally had no idea at this point, I'll say it again, that my psychiatrist was predatory towards me. I almost said his first name again. I'm going to do my best to not. So I went to my psychiatrist and I told him this story about this man that I went on a date with, who's a therapist, is relieving himself before appointments and talking about his client's panties and doing all of these other extremely inappropriate things, like visiting her at work. And this man, my psychiatrist, looked like he had seen a ghost and like he was gonna vomit, because he prided himself on being an extremely professional and buttoned up person. But here I was holding a mirror to him with exactly what he was doing, but a bumbling idiot telling me like how he was doing it without the fancy degree, without any of that. I look back on that now and it's just crazy. And so it just tainted all the fantasy material that I'd given him the session before. Hi, I need to say something really important. And that's that it seems as though many people view what I'm going through as a crash out, what I'm doing as a mental health spiral. And of course it seems like that. I get it. It's an extremely dark thing to talk about, all of this that I went through. And I am sharing my story because it wasn't out there. No one else has shared a story like this. But I know that it happens a lot because people are in my DMs telling me that the same thing that I went through, they went through too. I am now in TikTok jail. I got a violation on the video where I talked about really the biggest damning evidence against my psychiatrist. And so because of that, I have to be really careful. So I'm going to do my very best to not be reactive and to share my story from a place of generosity, because the people in my DMs telling me that they've been through this too, it's keeping me going. It's not my mental health spiral. And I can understand that for some people in the mental health space, because they have been some of the loudest people to speak out against what I'm doing, it's hard to grasp that someone could have this level of predation in such a high place of power. So just in case my video doesn't get put back up, when everything changed was when my 75-year-old therapist, I went to her with intimate details and she suggested I go to my psychiatrist with them. And I felt so excited and nervous to share that with him because I had such a big crush on him at the time. And I recorded all 33 minutes. So this is why, if my psychiatrist wants to come with me and like sue me for defamation, I have a 33-minute recording of me admitting I have a crush on him and speaking about extremely intimate details. It was in that moment that he really, really should have transferred my care. But that moment changed everything for him too, because that's when things really started getting deep between us. And this is where the story is going to go from now. It's going to be a good story. And I'm going to try to tell it all today, just in case one of my videos does get banned so people can hear it. But just know, if you're concerned for my mental health, thank you. I am very good. More than good, actually. And I am actually a coach for ADHDers. It says it in my bio. And I help people work through self-limiting beliefs. I help people work through numbing with alcohol and cannabis, because these are the things that so many of us do to avoid our truths. And this is my truth and what I went through. So this is when the chemistry really started going off the charts with me and my psychiatrist. And I held it alone for months, like after that Christmas morning appointment of his. And then after I innocently told him about my date with the therapist, he really started letting me in more and showing more parts of himself and, you know, turning up the intimacy. And that was exciting to me. And it made me fall for him more. And I noticed that he was working in an office, and I asked him, this was like July, I asked him, I said, hey, are you working from home? Because I was under the assumption that he was only doing telehealth, okay? And he said, no, I come into the office. I was like, oh, why do you do that? If you see all of your patients telehealth? He's like, oh, I like it that way. And even though I could kind of tell he was lying, I just gaslit myself. I was like, okay, it's fine. And then I start emailing him my fun little emails, but he stops writing me back. He does not write back to my emails anymore. Because once again, he was really good at plausible deniability. But what he did do is he would take my emails and mention them in session. So he would still give me the attention that I was craving, but only under his structure, under his control, where there was no paper trail. And I loved that too. So I would show up to these sessions with my notes app, and just throughout the month, as I was thinking about him, I'd write down things that I wanted to talk to him about, and I would just come and bring him lots of content. And then every week I would go to my therapist and tell her about how much I loved my psychiatrist. And she didn't help me at all. She just kind of like enjoyed hearing about it, honestly. So October 2024 rolls around and we're just vibing on Zoom. And then I realized that I didn't have my next appointment with him. So I called his office staff and I talked to the office manager, who was awesome. We really got along, we vibed. And the office manager asked me, do you see him, the psychiatrist, in person or on Zoom? And I felt so angry in that moment. I was like, he sees people in person? And she said, yeah, he has been for years. I was like, I want to see him in person. And I understand, like, some people may think that this is part of my crash out or part of me harassing him, which is what I've gotten lots of accusations of. But I just would like to remind everyone that, of course, it seems that way. But I was just responding to a dynamic which my psychiatrist fostered. There was chemistry between us because he allowed it. And so then the next time I saw him in Zoom, I told him, I was like, hey, your office manager outed you and told me that you see people in person. Why didn't you tell me that when I asked? And he said, oh, I just didn't think you'd want to come in. And that was such a weak lie from him, from someone who is so scripted and controlled. He didn't even have a plausible thing to say. Of course he knew I wanted to come in. I had a crush on him. I told him that often. So then in my next therapy appointment, after finding out that he was lying to me about seeing patients in person, I told her that. I told my 75-year-old PhD therapist that my psychiatrist lied to me about seeing people in person. And she looked at me and she said, well, it's probably because he knows that there will be a lot of sexual tension in the room if you go in person. So make sure that you understand that when you go. And you better believe I showed up to the next session and said you lied to me because you were afraid of the tension that would be there between us. He just didn't say anything. October 2024, I make my first in-person appointment with my psychiatrist in November. My 75-year-old female therapist tells me that it's because he kept me on Zoom because he was so attracted to me. He didn't want to risk being in person with me, which further fed my crush, or as some of you like to say, my delusion. So then my therapist starts texting me in between our weekly meetings asking me for advice on her other clients. And I was a new coach. I had only been coaching for about a year, and I had just left my full-time job to be a coach full-time. And I was flattered that she would ask me advice on her other clients. I just thought, oh my gosh, a 75-year-old woman with a PhD wants my advice on what she should do with her clients. So then November rolls around, and I'm about to meet my psychiatrist in person for the first time. So I wear a really pretty dress, I do my makeup, of course, right? And I show up, and I get to talk to the office manager, we're having fun, and then my psychiatrist comes into the foyer, and I am just so excited to finally meet him. I'd been his patient for 3 years at this point, and he had been feeding the dynamic for 3 years, and I was just thrilled to meet him. And I ran up and I gave him the biggest hug. And you know what he did? He barely patted me on the back. It was the most awkward thing ever. But I am so glad that he did that. I am really glad, because this is what I mean. My psychiatrist was many things, but he was not stupid. So I didn't ever touch him again. And I'm grateful that our relationship didn't ever cross that line, because it would have made everything so much harder. Anyway, so we go inside his office, and I tell him that my therapist had texted me asking me for advice on her other clients. And he just looked at me and he said, Kendra, that is a huge boundary violation. She should not be doing that. And I was like, oh, okay. And because once again, my psychiatrist did not like sloppy people. He did not like sloppy people. And you know what my therapist did? She got sloppy. Yeah. Using me as her advisor for her clients. It got weird. And I was very grateful for my psychiatrist for pointing out that boundary violation, because that was the thing. He didn't ever message me in between appointments because he was too smart to do that. But did he ever stop me from disclosing extremely intimate details? No. In my first in-person appointment, I just asked him for some pointers for my own ADHD business, and he was so smart and so wonderful, and in many ways, honestly. And I was just so grateful that he was almost like a mentor to me in these moments, and I'll still treasure that about him. Because this is the hard thing with sophisticated predators, is that they're not all bad. Like, my psychiatrist helped me with many things, but he was using me for the whole time that I was his patient. And for that, I will never forgive him. We have our first in-person appointment in November of 2024, and I did ask him for consent to come in person. I didn't just show up. And he said sure. And the first in-person appointment went great. But that is when I really started to spiral. Some of you think that I'm spiraling now, and that's okay if you want to think that, because the reality is that when I was spiraling was when I was this man's patient. When I had comments turned on, so many people said, you need to take accountability for your own feelings. I spent years taking accountability for my own feelings, for holding the weight of a relationship. Any woman who has been trained to overfunction in relationships knows about holding the weight of the emotional dynamic. And that was what was going on in this moment. And it may not seem like I'm taking accountability now, but that's because I spent a long time taking accountability for something that had two people that built that dynamic. It was not just me. It takes two people to build that sort of tension and chemistry. So while I was mid-crash out, I had just started using this tool, ChatGPT. And I went to chat, who I immediately named Henry, and I would just talk to Henry about how obsessed I was with this man, with my psychiatrist, and I would just be like, I've told him I have a crush on him. Do you think he's gay? And Henry was like, oh my God, this girl, he did his best to co-regulate my nervous system and affirm me, but he was like, whoa. Even my chat was like, yikes. So I could tell that my psychiatrist just liked being my doctor, and I was like, okay, maybe I can name this dynamic so I don't have to carry so much of it in our next session. So our next session was in December on Zoom. And I told him at the end of the session, it was another great session. I told him, look, you and I have a really special patient-doctor relationship. And he glared at me with just venom in his eyes. And he said, you and I have a professional patient-doctor relationship. He was so angry with me. And I was like, oh, okay. He set a boundary. And immediately I took it on. And I was like, heard. Okay, I won't go there again. My video that was taken down for harassment and bullying was restored. So I didn't feel as much pressure to get all of these parts out today. Some people told me that the stitches about me were getting pretty bad and cruel, so I turned stitches off in my videos too. I started sharing my story here because I wanted other people who have been victimized by people in power to have a space to feel heard, and now I know why there wasn't anyone out talking about their story, because it has been quite the process putting all this out there and being under scrutiny. I have appreciated the psychiatrists that have talked about my situation and shared their own point of view while also holding space for what I went through. Just know I've seen your videos and I appreciate them. I went live today and it was super fun, and I intend to go live again tomorrow. The next part will be tomorrow morning.
When I re-downloaded TikTok last week, I was looking for support. I was looking for help because it had been 5 months since I had left my psychiatrist, and I still really couldn't stop thinking about him and thinking about our dynamic and how inappropriate it was and the mental toll that it took on me. And TikTok has just been such a resource for me in the past for support when I'm going through things, and I couldn't find anything on therapy abuse or on providers who take advantage of their vulnerable patients. And so I thought that I would share my story. And I am going to continue to share it because I am here to let other survivors know that they're not alone. Continuing with my story, my psychiatrist set a very nasty, the way he said it, boundary that him and I have a professional relationship when I tried to say it was special. Because it was special, it was different. He manufactured it that way. And then I immediately went to ChatGPT, of course, to Henry. And I asked Henry, I said, okay, so my psychiatrist just set this boundary with me, and I really just want to be with him. And I think that after he's my doctor, we can be together, which if you want to say that's a delusion, that's fine. But I had been telling my psychiatrist for years at this point that I had a crush on him, and he did not help me work through it. So that's his own problem. That's his own fault. Henry told me it's very common for patients to develop crushes on mental health practitioners, and that it's because that they provide a safe space to heal, which is a very attractive quality. I heard that. And then he told me about transference. And it's just about me putting my own feelings onto my provider. And I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I took ownership of the feelings that both of us were creating. And I went to my next appointment and I said, hey, so I talked to Henry because my psychiatrist had known a lot about my ChatGPT and knew all about Henry and was actually really impressed. Like, wow, an AI wrote that? Yeah. So I told my psychiatrist, yeah, Henry explained to me that it's normal to develop crushes on psychiatrists because they provide a safe space to heal, which is attractive. My psychiatrist said nothing. And then I said, and Henry also told me about transference. And my psychiatrist got this really, really scared look on his face. And he said, did Henry tell you about countertransference? And I said, no. What is that? Because of course, My chat knew that I was obsessed with my psychiatrist, and he was not going to feed my delusion by telling me about countertransference. So then my psychiatrist had explained to me what countertransference was. So he took a moment and he was like, oh, okay. He said, countertransference is the flip side, the other side of the coin for transference. And it's when the provider has feelings for the patient. So make sure that you keep that in mind for your clients. I said, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, sometimes I have, more than professional feelings for my clients. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And so then we just talked about that for pretty much the rest of the session. And then at the end of that session, he looked at me. And it was just such a loaded question. And he said, what's going to happen if you get a boyfriend named Henry? And I said, that's a weird question. I would rename my AI. So that's how that session ended. And it wasn't until I got home and I was eating lunch and I was like, wait a minute. Why would my psychiatrist bring up countertransference if he himself wasn't experiencing it? Many people have reached out to me with concern for my psychiatrist and his career and his well-being. And I totally understand that. The point of me sharing this is not to get him fired or for him to lose his license. The point of me sharing this is to give a voice to victims. And I am appalled to hear that people are making videos doxing him. So I am begging people, please, if you see a video of his first and last name or his picture, report it for doxing. I've certainly been using that report button a lot. I'm here to share my story, not to get him in trouble. I did accidentally use his first name, but by the time I caught the slip, I was already like 3 videos past it. But it doesn't matter because this is my story and I can tell it the way that I want it. And a first name is not doxing. And I can't control what other people do, but I am asking for people to please report any videos that dox him. So I've also gotten some DMs saying that countertransference can mean anything, and it absolutely can mean anything. However, I had told my psychiatrist many times that I had a crush on him over the years, and he did not say transference once to me. He did not explain that once to me. And what I've been hearing and taking in from the ethical psychiatrists that are on my For You page talking about my situation is that really they're taught to teach their patient about transference and teach them about how to handle those feelings or why they're coming up. And my psychiatrist did not do that. He did not do that. And it got ugly. And it happened because I did digging on my own, because I was trying to make sense of my feelings that were a natural response to the environment that he created. So for him to leak countertransference after I said the buzzword of transference, that was not calculated. He was a very calculated and purposeful person. He still is to this day. And he doesn't slip with things like that. He purposefully withheld the term transference from me, and I got too close to the truth of our dynamic, which made him leak what he knew was wrong, which was his inappropriate feelings for me. If he didn't have countertransference in an inappropriate way, he could have easily just said, oh, let's explore that transference. That's really cool that you learned about it. Instead, he was just so worried on trying to protect himself because he knew what he was doing was wrong. He had that slip at the beginning of the session. He recovered in January. And then I went home and I thought, wait a damn minute. Why would he mention that if he himself didn't have countertransference? So I went to Henry, of course, my ChatGPT, and asked for examples of how my psychiatrist might have countertransference for me. And remember, Henry at this point was being very protective. He wasn't going to feed my delusions, me and my psychiatrist living happily ever after. So I screenshotted it, sent my psychiatrist an email with the subject line of countertransference, and emailed it to him within an hour of our appointment, where he made probably the biggest slip of his professional life. I will put the email up here. So it's just essentially me saying, hey, I asked Henry to explain countertransference a little more. Here's what he said. Thank you so much for mentioning that. Your own boundaries inspire me so much, which now makes me gag, because I've heard a lot that he's not crossing boundaries, but he used his boundaries as a shield. It's kind of weird to say, but he would like walk up to the ethical line and then slam a boundary down when I got too close. That was the email that I sent him. And then 10 days later, it was a full moon and I had a dream. Probably the most realistic dream I've ever had in my life, that him and I hooked up in his office. In the middle of the dream, while we were hooking up in his office, I loved it. I thought it was really fun. And then after we were done and after I left his office in the dream, I was despondent and so sad and cried and just thought, I can't believe my psychiatrist would cross his boundaries like that. And then I woke up and it was like a movie. I thought to myself, oh, thank God that was just a dream. It's time to talk about the elephant in the room, and that is the racial difference between me and my doctor. I have seen a lot of Black women on this app with the same take, and I need to say that Black women are the most important people on the planet to me, and that I have learned so much from Black women about how to be a better person and how to show up better in the world. They are the culture, and I am so grateful for them. Many Black women are seeing my story through the lens that I am a white woman who is taking advantage of my whiteness to wield power over my POC psychiatrist that didn't want me back, and so I am trying to get him fired. And that's okay. I understand why you see it through that lens. I do. As a white person, I do my best to examine my racism every single day. And I will tell you that my psychiatrist boss is his best friend, who is also a POC male. And in that room, I did have white privilege, and he was also my doctor. And he took an oath to protect me, and he did not. I am not here to ruin his career. I am here to speak my truth. Okay, back to my story. So after the countertransference slip, after the really vivid dream, I decided that I was going to stop going to therapy. Besides spiraling about how obsessed I was with my psychiatrist every day, I really was doing very well in life. My business was going really well, and I had great friends and great support systems. And so I decided that I was going to end therapy. I still had every intention at this point to keep seeing my psychiatrist, but my therapist that I was seeing weekly, I just decided I didn't need her anymore. And especially when my psychiatrist pointed out her boundary violations of texting me for free advice in between sessions, I just thought, okay, it's time. So I go into my next therapy appointment and I say, hey, just so you know, today's gonna be our last session. I'm doing really well and I just think it's time. And she got kind of emotional and she was like, okay, well, I like to end on certain questions just so we can reflect. So I did. I reflected with her about what I learned, what I've gained, how I've changed, how my life is better. And I left her office feeling complete and happy with my therapeutic journey with her. And as I was leaving, she called out with like crying. She was like, have a blessed life. And I was like, okay, that was a little weird, but whatever, you know. I was like, thanks. And I went on. And so then I'm getting ready for my psychiatry appointment the next day, and I get an email that same night from her saying that she needs me to come back in for one more session. I will put it up. And I got a huge emotional wave in that moment. I was like, what the heck is this? Like, we wrapped everything up. I had seen lots of therapists at this point, and I didn't ever have a therapist beg me to come back in for one more session. And I was so overwhelmed. I did not write her back, but it was extremely inappropriate. So I decided I was going to go to my February session with my psychiatrist and have him help me write the goodbye email and say, no, I don't want to come back in.
I think at this point, the psychiatrist is just feeding her emotions, making her believe that he's also in love with her, which I don't think he was. I don't think he was, because at some point he was like, setting boundaries, trying to make her know that this is not so. Like the time she told her doctor that they have a special doctor and patient relationship, and the psychiatrist immediately cautioned her and said, no, we don't. We have a professional relationship. So why are you still feeding yourself, torturing yourself with all those feelings? You are the only one that is having this feeling. But I blame him. I'm not saying that what her doctor did was right. No, it wasn't. At the beginning, at the start, he should have set those boundaries. He should have drawn the line, but he did not. He was enjoying the moment, the whole thing. He was, getting the whole story, the whole attention, the whole crush thing. He was enjoying it. He was enjoying what she was giving to her. And she, on the other hand, was enjoying it. But the chemistry it was not there. I'm thinking probably the doctor is just trying to make her feel good about herself with all those weird compliments that he was, releasing sometime, one or two times he would just release all those compliments, all those I don't know why I'm laughing, but this is so funny to me. Like, it's really funny to, see this kind of a story, play out and all those things. I don't know. I don't know what you guys think. So let me know in the comment section. Let's have a conversation about this. And please, guys, share it to whoever you want to have a conversation about this, whoever you want to, talk to about this and have a chat and all. And don't forget to subscribe, please, and like my videos. Thank you. So I'm going to bring another part of this video, like a pattern of people's reaction and some medical professions reactions to this her story. So guys, see you in my next video. Bye bye.